You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This is my 10-week group coaching program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the first week of May. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 414. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I teach women's health professionals how to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practices, and I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with me today. Today I'm sharing a brand new episode in my Fertility Awareness Reality series. I'm sharing my call with Callie. And in today's episode, we're talking about conception, we touch on sperm health, and we also touch on coffee. And so in today's episode, we're going to just kind of jump into that question of, does coffee affect hormones? Does it affect fertility? I feel like coffee is a really interesting topic because so many people love coffee. It's part of the culture. And there's a lot of different information out there, but really what we're focusing on today is how it can affect the menstrual cycle and what happened when Callie decided to stop drinking coffee. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And I'm excited to be here today with Callie. Callie is a member of my Fertility Awareness Mastery Live program. And at the time we're recording this, we're about halfway through. So we've had quite a few sessions together already. And so with that, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I always say this. I mean, I love doing these episodes. It's really fun for me to be able to connect with you kind of outside of the confines of the program, because I always find that there's other pieces of the story that kind of come through. Yeah. I'd love to start just by asking you, how old were you when you had your first period, and share a little bit about early menstruation, if you've ever used the pill before, and basically what brought you to wanting to use fertility awareness at this point.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I believe I think I was 12 or 13 when I got my first period. So right in there. I remember it was 7th grade, but I'm an August baby. So I was always younger. So it kind of confuses me. So it was right in there. And yeah, it just came, and I remember it being pretty regular. Like it didn't come and then go away for 6 months and then start back up again. It was like, once it started, it just kept on going. And don't remember it being terribly painful at first, like in middle school. Yeah. So in high school, things started to change. My periods became much heavier, lots more cramps. I had to stay home a couple of times. And I just remember, they were more of an ordeal than they were. And then, but for the most part, it was, I guess, relatively normal. Other than that, I didn't have any terrible headaches or any other major symptoms that I can recall. So yeah, life goes on. I did use hormonal contraceptives for about 10 years, maybe 10 plus, from about the time I was 18, I would say, until I got off the pill when me and my husband started trying to have our baby, probably when I was 28, 29-ish, right in there. So yeah, long time hormonal contraceptive use. And I do remember asking one of my providers at one point, like, oh, is it okay to, be on this for very long? And I vividly remember her saying, yeah, it actually helps prevent cancer and it's really good for you to be on it. So I don't know. Looking back, I think I maybe should have questioned that a little bit more, but I didn't have any major reactions or symptoms at the time that I remember. Like I took it religiously because I was deathly afraid of getting pregnant before I was ready, which is kind of funny now in hindsight. Spend so much time worrying about that and then have some troubles getting pregnant. Yeah, so I was on it for a long time. I have gut issues now, so that could contribute to that long-term hormonal contraceptive use. Not sure, I don't know that I would ever really truly know, but I have a feeling that could be I also have celiac disease, which contributes to all of that too, but all of it just compounding factors. So yeah, that's all I can think of with the hormonal contraceptive use. I mean, I did try a couple different brands. It was always just the pill. I never tried a IUD or anything like that. It was always just the pill. I tried a couple different ones, like a low, and I don't really recall why I changed it up, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when you were talking about a few things, so you mentioned you were told that the pill prevents cancer and it's really good for you. It's interesting because the pill, increases the chance of certain cancers and reduces the chance of others. So it increases the risk of cervical cancer and liver cancer and breast cancer, but it reduces the risk of ovarian cancer and endometrial cancer, statistically. And so when you read the research about it, it's interesting because it's almost like they're required. I don't know if the researchers are required to follow a certain format, but when you read about it, it'll always say, like, although there's this increase in these kind of cancers, it reduces these kind of cancers. So it's all good. And that is an interesting way to put it. Certainly media friendly, but ultimately it's not a vitamin. And it was the first drug that was ever created to, basically suppress a perfectly natural function in the body. So whether we can go so far as to say it's good for you, I would say, wait a minute, but we can certainly say like what it does and how it works and the purpose of it and that kind of thing. So I would probably disagree with that perspective that it's good for you, just to kind of blanket say that it reduces cancer without the full kind of like discussion around what it does. So just for anyone who hasn't heard that before, I like to put things into context is basically where I'm going with that.
Yeah. Very interesting because that detail wasn't provided at the time for sure.
Yeah. Typically not provided. And also just the kind of, but this is ultimately, it's not to say anything negative against your doctor because that's basically how we are taught about it. That's how medical professionals are taught about it. That's how a lot of the research talks about it. It's a reversible contraceptive method. They say that it's low risk, although contraceptives have a black box warning because some women do die from taking it as directed. A small percentage, albeit, but still happens. And I don't know that many women who die from eating chicken. And so I feel like we have to acknowledge that it's a medication. Anyway, so I'm going to stop on that. But just because you had brought that up, I thought it would be a good opportunity to share that. So, I mean, it sounds like your early experience was fairly typical, fairly common in the sense that they started off your periods pretty normal. It's very common, obviously, to experience the pain. Interesting that it just kind of shifted and changed. And I think we've talked about it a little bit. At this stage, you still experience some degree of pain, is what I have.
Yeah. It's improved dramatically with some dietary changes, lifestyle changes. Even with not using tampons has helped me, honestly. I noticed a big change in some acupuncture. Like I've done it all at the stage of the game. I feel like, it's changed a lot. So after I had my daughter in 2014, and it took us roughly a year or so to conceive her. And after her, I never went back on the pill after that because we knew we wanted to have more kids. And my periods came back right away after having her. I don't recall them and I breastfed her for nearly a year, but even with that, my periods still came back. But I don't remember them being super painful or heavy, but that time was also kind of a blur with my first newborn. So
you don't say.
Yeah, right. Told you already, but I've conceived 3 times and had the 2 losses. but with all of those, my periods have been very regular. They've come every month. I don't recall ever having, I mean, I might've had an ovulatory cycle potentially. I wasn't charting back then. I charted just based on Tony Weschler's book and what I could read and figure out on my own before having her and trying to time sex appropriately. But other than that, once I had her, I kind of stopped charting and just tried to get by.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we started to try and have our second baby, I started paying more attention again. So, but I don't recall ever like missing a period or having a month where I didn't have one. So that's been relatively normal. My cycles are historically pretty short though. 24 to 26 days is pretty typical for me. So on the short side, but like last month, my luteal phase it ended up being 13 days. So I used to have a lot of spotting. Like I'd have probably, I don't want to say like maybe 3 or 4 days of very, very light spotting before my period would start. And that's since improved since making all the dietary changes and lifestyle changes that we've made over the last 4 years. So.
Well, and you had mentioned something, I think I was trying to think of it earlier, but it had slipped my mind, but you had mentioned that you have some gut issues, you have celiac disease, and you aren't sure whether or not the pill could have contributed. And so for any of the listeners who might have that same question, I mean, there is data and research on this link between contraceptive use, kind of just some degree of disruption of the gut flora. I don't know that you could go so far to say that the pill causes gut problems, but you could say that individuals who either have pre-existing gut issues or potentially like a predisposition to gut issues, the pill can exacerbate those problems. So that's something that's actually known. And on a micro level of that, there are a lot of women who go on the pill and suddenly start having yeast infections, and then the doctor gives them the drug for the yeast, and then they get the BV, and then they kind of go back and forth for a while. And then when they come off of it, it settles down. So we do know that there is some sort of link there, but not necessarily causative, but could certainly exacerbate.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah. I don't think I have specifically asked about this, but in terms of your celiac's pretty serious. So I think people who have celiac have to sort it out pretty quickly. But where are you with that? You know, is it mostly under control, or do you still struggle with it at times?
Well, I would have said it was under control, and I think it is. So I'm pretty sure I've probably had it my whole life, like, because it's there, right? As far as I understand, in your genes, and then, sometimes it can just be triggered, or your immune system goes haywire, and then that's when it starts flaring up. I'm no doctor or expert, but that's my basic understanding. So, but I wouldn't say I was a sickly child. I was thriving and growing, and I was healthy and fine, but I had a lot of digestive issues. I threw up all the time, to the point where, like, in middle school, my parents were like concerned that I was bulimic because of how like anxious I was and how much I threw up. And I wasn't rail thin by any means, but they were concerned because I was throwing up at such a rate, and never put, because that celiac really wasn't a thing back then in the early 90s. So yeah. And I always had a lot of gas, as embarrassing as that is. You're
not the only one. It's okay.
Well, right. But very specific to gluten, I found out, because as soon as I took that away, all of that stopped. So that was my biggest thing. I wasn't so sensitive to where if I ate a piece of bread, I would, throw up within an hour or two. It would accumulate, and then over, 2 or 3 days, then I would throw up, and it was very sporadic. So it was very hard to draw the lines and make the connections to the food that I was eating. So I honestly only got it tested for celiac because my mother was having issues, and her doctor had suggested that both me and my sister get tested because it has a genetic component as well. And so we both did, and I was the lucky one that has celiac, and she supposedly doesn't.
You won the celiac lottery.
Yeah, exactly. Yay. It could be worse though, because at least it pointed me down a more healthful journey. So in a way, it was kind of a good thing. So yeah, I've taken that out, and then I have not eaten bread since, it was like 2016, I think, when I got my diagnosis. And it probably took me a year, honestly, to really embrace that diagnosis. It's like, no, I can have a little. And then it's like, no, you can't, because once you take it out, then you do notice when you add it back in. Like I was much more aware. And then more recently, like I haven't cheated. I've been very good. I don't eat gluten, but I was having some other issues. And with some of my fertility challenges, I went to a specialist and did some tests, and it still is showing that I was getting gluten somewhere. So either a cross reaction or potentially, some sneaking in somewhere, maybe restaurants, although we don't eat out very much, but more than likely it was cross reaction from having a leaky gut. So I've been working for the last 6 months now, roughly, to heal that up through an elimination diet and all the things, supplements and all of that stuff. So
yeah, because I mean, that's certainly a factor, obviously contributing to more localized inflammation, and gut problems certainly play there. It's complicated, obviously, as you know, and it certainly plays a role from the female side. Yeah. And I was going to ask about that because it's gluten is in everything. It's everywhere. And it depends on the level of sensitivity. So I've had certain clients who, if they have a stray gluten contamination food at a restaurant, that they have severe gut pain. And so it really ranges in terms of the symptomology there. But yeah, that's a huge, huge piece of this puzzle for you. At least you found that out and you're working really hard and diligently on that now. So yeah, so I just wanted to check in about that.
It is interesting though, because with my daughter, I mean, she's very healthy. I was eating all the gluten, all the sugar, but I was just younger, I think that's the biggest thing. And even when we conceived my son, I was not aware of my celiac diagnosis. Oh, I guess I probably was, actually. Sorry. But yeah, I still wasn't eating very healthfully. And it's like the healthier I've eaten, the harder it's gotten. But I think it's just, as you get older, it does get harder. And sadly, nobody really tells you that anymore. Like, I feel like we used to say that, and then it became like taboo to say it because it was like shaming. But
yeah, it's an interesting turn. Yeah. I've seen that happen as well, in that there was a time when people would just outright say that as you get older, it's harder. And, and these days there's a push to be very fertility positive at all ages and that kind of thing, which there's value in that, because at the bottom of it all is individual differences. Because obviously there are women who get pregnant at all kinds of different ages. Yeah. But then there's still, like, at the end of the day, though, we're still all humans. And there are certain things that happen with human females. And one of those things is that the fertility does eventually decline and stop. So we can talk all we want about the positives, but what I would say from my perspective, because I'm not a Debbie Downer doomsday type person, but what I would say is, as we get up in age, so as we get in that age range, 35 and above, and particularly early 40s, that has to be something that we're aware of, that the egg quality declines. We're more susceptible to oxidative stress. We're more susceptible to chromosomal abnormalities. In most scenarios, our partners are also older. Right. I'm always going to throw the partners into the conversation because I'm sick and tired of pretending like that's not a thing. And so although men don't have the same type of menopause scenario where they stop making sperm, they make sperm from puberty onwards. Older men have sperm that is more susceptible to oxidative stress, potentially more DNA damage, meaning that older men's sperm is more challenging from that fertility perspective. And so with all of that said, it doesn't mean that we just say, oh, well, you're older and it's not going to happen. We say, okay, well, we know that at this age, there's specific challenges. So that means that we have to approach it with specific strategies to kind of offset some of those issues.
Right. Yeah.
So along that line, so I mean, the question of like, why fertility awareness now, I think you've already shared that with us. I mean, ultimately, you've been trying to conceive. And I think, like many women, it's kind of like, well, let me see if there's anything else here that I haven't done yet. Let me try to understand my cycle better, that kind of thing. But maybe share in your own words. I just kind of usurped that.
No, you pretty much nailed it. But yeah, I have been doing fertility awareness, again, just what I could learn from a book, and just had questions, feeling like I'm partially like, I must be doing something wrong because we're not pregnant yet. Like, I've been pregnant before. I thought I timed it well before. Like, what am I missing? I'm missing something. Something's changed. So just really wanting to dive in, get to the root cause, and really, have somebody else look at my charts, look at some things. And even if it comes down to validating, yes, you're doing everything right. You just got to keep trying or do this and that and tweak stuff. It's just helpful to have a community to talk through some of those things. And because if you don't have anyone in your house or your girlfriends aren't doing it, it's like speaking a different language. So really having that help. And then part 2 of that is I don't want my daughter to struggle with any of this stuff that I've struggled with. She's going to know so much more than I did from the get-go. And so if I've had to go through all of what I've been through for that, then maybe it's all been worth it, because maybe I wouldn't have learned all of this if I hadn't had my losses. And I don't know, maybe I would have shared more with her anyways. But so that's, I want to be able to teach her and give her resources and then point her your way if necessary at that point too. So, so yeah, I just think it's something that, all females should be taught this. We should know this about our bodies as soon as we hit puberty, if not even before, right? Like, hey, this is coming. Don't be scared.
Yeah.
And it is magical and beautiful. And it's so special. Like, I do remember thinking when I was little, before I had my period, like, oh my gosh, I feel kind of bad for men because they'll never get to carry a baby. Because I thought that was just the most special thing. And it is, right? So just learning about it and connecting with other women has been really nice.
Yeah, it is a really special, unique, just very like experience that women get to have with. It's interesting how society paints it so negatively, right? Like, oh, your period and all of this stuff, when we literally get to carry life in our bodies. So right. It's very interesting how we paint it in such a way, considering what it is. But that's a whole other topic. Well, we can switch into the session part of our session. There's one question. I think that I asked you this question, or we talked about this a little bit in the hot seat. Has your partner had a semen analysis?
So he has. After our second loss, my miscarriage, we went to a fertility clinic and did a full workup, and he had a semen analysis there. And then actually we just had another one done recently to make sure. And so I don't have that right here on me. I can send it to you later though, if you want to.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's right. Cause I'm looking at what I have in my end of things, and you did send over the one that was done in, what year was that?
Should have been like 2019, I think.
Yeah, probably. I don't see it, but
so
yeah,
it's almost 3 years now.
2019. Yes. So when I take a look at it here, I don't see a morphology number, but the motility is good. The concentration is listed at 29 million per milliliter, which is higher than the World Health Organization standards. But optimal is closer to about 50 million per milliliter. Okay. And so we'll see if the latest one has the morphology number. But the reason I just always want to bring that to the table. And so we're at the point in class where we have finally finished the birth control aspect of it. It takes a few classes to go through all the details and information, as you well know.
Yeah.
And so now we're at the point in class where next week we're going to be going into conception, and we'll be in that conversation for a couple of weeks. So we'll be getting more into the sperm quality conversation, egg quality conversation, optimizing chances. I feel like by the time we get through the birth control, from the flip side, you kind of know, because it's kind of like just do the opposite. But there are a couple of specific things that we'll talk about a little bit more. So, but yes, that part is important, because from a statistical standpoint, so just kind of outside of a one-to-one basis, when you have a couple who is trying to conceive for a year or more, statistically speaking, he's more likely to not have optimal sperm quality, in the sense that not to say that he's not fertile, but to say that he may fall into the subfertile range with one or more of the sperm parameters. So that's something just to always be aware of, because chances are, if the conception isn't happening within a timely manner, there's probably a bit of room for improvement on his side.
Yeah. And I believe the test, I think we just got it done yesterday. I believe it came back. They still didn't have morphology on that test. So I don't know if they just don't test at that clinic.
You can ask. Yeah, you can ask if, just so that you have that background, ask the doctor, just maybe they'll tell you why it's not there. Or, and maybe they don't think it's valid, because there is a lot of debate in the scientific community as to how relevant the sperm analysis is. So I think the conclusion is that it is relevant, because it's kind of what they have for the most part. But there's no test is perfect. So a person could actually have pretty decent numbers, but be high on the sperm DNA damage spectrum, and that may not come through on the results. So there's no test that's perfect. And then there's debate about the morphology number. So, right, some people would say, oh, that's, not that important. And others would say it's very important. So it's very interesting to see the differences between how all of these factors are looked at. But either way, the way I look at it is that we do have an idea of what's optimal, or at least the optimal range. And so from my perspective, there's always something we can do to improve that a bit.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. I mean, I think we're open to, he's living a very, along with me, more healthful lifestyle than we ever have been. So I think open to certain changes are fine. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I pulled up your chart here. So, I mean, maybe we can start by why don't you let me know if you have any specific questions, if there were certain things you wanted to make sure that we talked about today.
Yeah, no, I did. Well, there was one. So we had talked about in my last hot seat about cutting out the caffeine.
We sure did.
And I have done that. As painful as it's been, I eased myself off. And even with easing myself off, I had a headache for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. And then the next 3 or 4 days after that, I was still in a fog, honestly. So I'm like, okay, not good for me. Obviously,
Isn't
not
that interesting though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How long it took was surprising. Every day at 11 o'clock, I would be yawning, almost half asleep.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. So probably good. It's gone. I've switched to decaf for now and just doing one little cup as more of a, just the ritual of having coffee than anything. So that should be fine, right? Just having some decaf.
Well, that is huge. So for the listeners, the context is that, I mean, we just talk about certain things. I have a certain protocol that I go through that I think if anyone listens to a lot of podcast episodes, you can piece it together. But I have a certain protocol that I encourage my clients to consider when we're dealing with specific challenges. So one of the most common challenges that we see when we're charting would be the hormone stuff. Issues with progesterone production is kind of one of the most obvious things that shows up on the chart. And I think that so coffee is controversial. It's very interesting. I find it to be a very interesting topic. And I would say it's controversial because people love their coffee. I love coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I really like a latte. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
So it's yummy. It's a social thing. It's a cultural thing. Yeah. It's definitely in the culture. It's you wake up and you have your coffee. I can't function without my coffee. Every TV show, it's all this. So it's very much embedded in the culture. And I think when you're paying attention to the menstrual cycle, from my perspective, though, I think that we can really underestimate what it can do to the body. So I feel like just your experience, and people kind of know that too. It's not like people don't know that if they cut out the coffee, they're going to feel not good for a couple. People know this.
Yeah.
And that would indicate a dependency. Because if I don't have green beans for a couple days, it's not right. It's not like I have a hard time functioning. So I just feel like you brought up a really important point, which is that it's doing something if you cut it out and you have the kind of, and I do too. I can drink coffee for 2 or 3 days in a row. And if I do that, if I drink coffee Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, if I stop drinking it on Thursday, I definitely have a headache for half the day. So it could just be that I'm sensitive, but it's doing something. Anyway, so that's huge that you did that. And I guess we'll see what happens. And I think very common that it takes a couple of days for your body to kind of start producing those hormones on its own again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been, and you can see from my temps even down here, they're kind of all over the board.
Yeah. A little bit up and down here.
Yeah. That's not super typical for me. I mean, sometimes I'll get one in the higher range and then they'll level out, but they're also on the lower side. When you look at my last chart was steady Eddie hovering between 97.5 and 97.6 Fahrenheit. And this one is just all over. So my first question was, it's kind of making it hard to see if I've already ovulated this cycle, which I would guess by my cervical position that I have. I would guess that I did yesterday, because there was a noticeable shift in my cervical position those last 2 days, like I noted, very noticeable. And then today it's back down. So I'm assuming I did. And I know if my temps stay high, I'm sure then I can corroborate that. But normally, yeah, I would have already like known for sure. So.
Well, let's talk it through. I mean, so from the perspective of charting here, there's different ways to confirm ovulation. So in class, we learn about how to confirm ovulation with temperature and mucus. And I encourage you to do it kind of as an exercise, like separately, because just because when you do it that way, it allows you to kind of see, especially at times like this one where it's not exactly matching up to what you would think. So just to paint a picture for the listeners here, in Callie's previous chart, there wasn't a lot of ups and downs. After your period ended, the temperatures kind of fell between that 97.5 range, if I'm looking correctly here,
Yeah,
97.5, 97.8 kind of thing. So they were pretty steady between there. And then in this cycle here, we have the temperatures ranging from 97.1 at the lowest to 98.0 in the pre-ov phase. So there's quite a bit of kind of up down zigzag kind of pattern here. And we've already gone through all the stuff in class. So I'm guessing that you're doing your 10 minutes and it's not really an issue with the thermometer.
I don't believe so. No, yes, I'm doing 10 minutes at least. Sometimes I accidentally snooze it and that stays in for 20, but
yes, but still better than nothing. And so obviously 20 is probably better than 10, although I've never asked anyone to do that much.
So I don't think that's the issue. I mean, coffee's the only thing that I changed, or caffeine more specifically. So I'm guessing that's it. And honestly, I had a harder time sleeping at first. Like my sleep was more erratic. I was just really threw me for a loop. But now that the headaches are gone and my sleep has gotten better, and I've actually been able to wake up a lot easier. I feel more rested. So I know I'm getting better sleep. So.
Well, and Callie, to be honest with you, like these are the types of things that I hear a lot. So as you can imagine, when meanie Lisa comes around and suggests to give up the coffee, I get a lot of pushback. I don't just randomly tell everyone to not drink coffee. First of all, I specifically look at the cycle and have a conversation with the client. And when you're having a specific type of challenge, that's when I'm looking at these kinds of options here. What I've seen. So just for the listeners who are kind of like, why is she still on with this coffee? I love my coffee. Just for the listeners' benefit here, there's a few trends I've seen, and I've talked about a few of them on the podcast. So the first is that coffee a lot of women replace meals with coffee. So a lot of women have coffee instead of breakfast. So they're doing the intermittent fasting thing. And so they drink coffee to tide them over in the morning because coffee suppresses appetite. And then they have their lunch later on. Many women actually drink coffee with their breakfast and then potentially skip lunch and drink coffee in the afternoons or whatever. And so whether you realize it or not, it's this appetite suppressant. So that's one of my bigger issue with coffee. But the second issue is basically what you're describing now, that we don't really realize how much of a dependence our body builds to the coffee. It's one thing to have coffee once in a while. It's another thing to have coffee 1 to 3 times a day kind of thing. And you don't really realize what a difference it's making in your normal adrenal function unless you cut it out. And so just from my angle, what I've seen when my clients cut coffee, I've seen that they start eating breakfast and they start eating lunch. So they're actually hungry and they're eating more, which is good. It's good to eat a sufficient quantity of food because we can't make our hormones without eating enough food. So that's a really big part of my issue with coffee. And then the other thing though, is even if you're drinking it in the morning, and I think this is what kind of surprises people, I stopped drinking it at noon. I don't drink coffee afternoon. But you think if you drink coffee at 7 or 8 in the morning, that it has no effect on your sleep whatsoever. But ironically, a lot of my clients find that when they cut out coffee, they sleep a lot better, even though they were having it in the morning. And they find that their body then starts to naturally because in order to feel awake in the morning, you need to make a certain amount of cortisol. And in order not to need a nap in the afternoon, you need to have that kind of continuous normal hormone pattern instead of this kind of crashing situation. And so anyways, just for the listeners' benefit, because Callie, you and I have gone through a lot of this, I think people kind of need to understand the context. And then the last thing that we tend to see as well, from my perspective, is an improvement in that luteal phase, improvement in progesterone production. So better cycle parameters. Like this is the reason that we suggest it, but there's other kind of side benefits that happen along the way. If you were waiting for the last minute, it is finally here. I wanted to jump into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. My 10-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Registration closes next week. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. So back to your chart. Okay, so based on the mucus pattern here, cycle day 10 would be your peak day. So the last day that you're seeing the clear, stretchy mucus. Mm-hmm. So based on, like, if we just look at mucus by itself, peak day is highly correlated to ovulation. So generally speaking, we look to peak day as a possible day of ovulation. Ovulation tends to happen on peak day or the day before or after. So kind of in that 3-day window, up to 80% of the time. So that's a good, it's not always like a conclusive by itself kind of thing, but it's something that we should look at to correlate with the other signs. So that's the first thing. Your cervical position here, we are seeing that so the way that you've marked it would indicate that cycle day 11 and 12 is when your cervix was like the highest and the most open. And then cycle day 13, we see it kind of falling back to the lower firm closed position, just how you've marked it here. And then we see that cycle day 12 is, so the way I've marked your chart, when I see a pre-ovulatory temperature that's kind of not like, it's kind of really high outside of the norm, I tend to think, okay, maybe that's an outlier. So I've kind of marked it here for you to see that I'm looking at these higher pre-ov temps and questioning them. So I would just put a question mark potentially. I could even do a question mark for effect here. So just so that you can kind of see what I see when I'm looking at the chart. That's kind of why I do it this way. So from that perspective, I'm not 100% confident, but based on my cycle analysis here, and I would even put potentially a question mark here. And we also know in this particular chart that you did change something major. You would kind of notice that you were feeling a little bit different and like obviously something was going on. So it kind of does make sense that it correlates with this weird temp pattern that we're seeing. So with that in mind, my analysis of the chart would be possibly, my hypothesis here is that maybe day 12. So that was kind of the first temp rise. These 2 days also, you got up at 6. So your wake up time ranges between, in this week here, 5:45 to 7. So pretty consistent, obviously. But on these 2 days, day 12 and day 13, you actually got up earlier on both of those days. If we look at the other days in your pre-ov, where you woke up around like 6:30, 6 o'clock, you'll notice that those temps are actually a bit lower. And ironically, your higher temps here, you woke up a little bit later. So from that perspective, day 12 and day 13, you woke up early, you woke up at 6 both days, but we're seeing higher temps. So it's my hypothesis. I'm not sure yet. I think we still need a day or two to see what happens if the temperature continues to rise and stay high. We don't see any mucus come back. Your cervix continues to stay in the low position. So I think we do need a day or two more to confirm, but I would say I'm pretty confident you probably ovulated around day 11 in line with the temps here. Around, I can't say for sure. It's around that same time that your cervix is open, your mucus kind of stopped happening. So we'll see what happens the next day. So what do you think about that analysis?
Yeah, I would have said day 12 is what I was thinking. I will often have that like almost like stutter step rise on the day. So you absolutely could be right. It could have been 11 or, you know, it's not perfect. It could be in between there. It's not like our bodies go, oh, change of day. So yeah, I have noticed though on several other cycles that kind of the day of ovulation, I'll have like this like stutter step where it's like a higher temp, but it's not quite high enough to really prove ovulation. And then it gets higher. So I don't know if that's what's going on there, or if you're right in that I ovulated on day 11 again.
Well, so one of the trends that I've noticed quite a bit over the years is that, so I mean, first and foremost, I mean, a lot of women come to me with questions and challenges. So we'll just put that out there. Fewer women come to me with like, these quote, what you would call quote, perfect chart. Right. So what I'm saying is that, I'm typically seeing clients who are struggling with certain things, whether it's a progesterone issue, mucus production. So I'm seeing a little bit more of the, like, I'm having this issue. This is why I'm here. And so with that said, when I'm working with a client who's, let's say, for example, that the progesterone production is not ideal. Let's say it's still okay, but let's say that it does take a couple of days, because basically what happens from that hormonal standpoint, again, for the listener's benefit, is that as you're approaching ovulation, like in a healthy cycle, you have good, strong follicular development, which leads to good, strong estrogen production. So in a healthy cycle, you're seeing good mucus, again, assuming you have a healthy cervix and you don't have any issues with mucus production. So the cervix is responsive to the estrogen. So you're seeing good, strong mucus production as you approach ovulation. And then once you ovulate, that follicle turns into the corpus luteum, which then in a healthy cycle makes like progesterone, and it really starts to produce a strong amount following ovulation. So what you said about, well, it's not just like a day and it changes. It's kind of, yeah, it does. So in a good, strong, healthy cycle, you ovulate and then the progesterone production starts to skyrocket. It takes up to 7 days to get to the peak, but it's still strong from the beginning. So in a strong cycle, when you have strong progesterone production, you're going to see a pretty abrupt stop to the mucus. Like it just stops. You see a strong, not necessarily the highest temp in the world, but you do see a rise. You see a temperature shift like right off the bat. And in a strong, when you have this good hormone production, you're going to see like the first 3 days of that temp rise, it's going to step up. Like it's showing you like, yes, the progesterone is causing that thermogenic effect in the body. So, okay. So we have that scenario. But when I'm working with a client who's got some challenges, struggles making progesterone, we're seeing some issues, short luteal phase, PMS, whatever, then what we tend to often see is that the mucus and the temperature don't necessarily match. So the mucus might drag on for a couple of days. It often gets like you're making less of it, but it's still dragging on. The temperature kind of like goes up a little and then kind of like a little more, but not really like, you're kind of like, is it really a rise? And then maybe like 3 or 4 days in, then you start to see the rise. So anyway, so I'm just saying like, it's that kind of stutter step, as you called it, is more common in situations where we don't have the ideal progesterone production. But as we make some positive changes, what we tend to see is like the better the progesterone, the better the hormone production, then it starts to line up better. It starts to be more clear, more easy to see, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So, I mean, with that, since I do have more limited cervical mucus, I would say, although this cycle seemed better than my last one, I had more days and it was more clear. The fact that I guess, since I'm limited on the cervical mucus, I didn't know if I should also be paying closer attention to my cervical position for timing intercourse, because that's kind of what I've done in this cycle, as you can see. But
so I would say that when the mucus is a bit limited for the purpose of timing, then yes, it is helpful to look at both signs. And so, I mean, in this cycle, you did have some mucus that you could actually stretch, which is a little bit different to the previous cycle. So that's a good sign. And it does look like the mucus matches up to ovulation, not necessarily exactly, but it does match up. And so, yes, I would combine those signs because in this cycle, it does seem from how you marked it that there were a couple of days where it was clearly different, clearly open. I certainly have worked with clients who don't really have a lot of mucus, but use the cervix position and time sex using that. So I do know of women who've been successful. I think for you, it's a little bit more of just the timing. Obviously, we have a few other things to talk about, work on. But in terms of timing, yes, that the cervical position in and of itself can be very helpful with timing.
Okay. Yeah, because that is one thing that always stresses me out every month is like, I feel all this pressure to time things perfectly. And then I'll see a little bit of mucus, get excited, have the sex. And then, I try to go every other day, for just our sanity and for sperm quality and all of those things. So, I feel like if I get it wrong, like here, probably in this cycle, for example, maybe day 11 would have been better, but we had sex on day 10. So it was like, I feel like I'm constantly getting it wrong, I guess.
Well, so first and foremost, you're not getting it wrong. From the most basic standpoint, just basic, no nuance, we just have to do it once in the window for it to be a try. So from the most basic standpoint, if you hit one of those days, and then the window specifically would be either the day of ovulation and or the 5 days leading up to it. So there, from that perspective, there's a 6-day window. And if you have sex with at least one time in that span, then you've hit the window. Mm-hmm. So I think we talked about this a little bit in the hot seat. We're going to get into this more next week when we have our session, because we're going to go through the conception handout all the way through. So, I mean, people talk a lot. So I'll give you the quick and dirty here. so people talk a lot about the every other day. And I think, so, and at the end of the day, it's all stressful. So there's a lot of information out there about have sex every other day all the time, have sex between days 10 and days 8 and days whatever. Right. So there's a lot of advice and information out there that's very stressful. So first and foremost, when you're targeting with the fertile window, when you're targeting with, mucus and things like that, I think it's helpful to realize that when you're doing that, you really are kind of like, there's literally like 6 days here. As we get a little bit older, many women find that they don't, like, it depends on the person. So some women still have 5-6 days of mucus, others have 2-3, and that's not uncommon. So from that perspective, you're somewhere in the middle, potentially somewhere between 2 to 3, maybe 4 days of mucus on average is what you're seeing before ovulation. So what I always say is it's helpful to know your patterns. So we're not predicting the date of ovulation, but it's helpful to kind of have that sense of, well, I usually see, this many days of mucus. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you're only seeing 2 to 3 days of mucus, the every other day strategy maybe is not going to be the best thing in the world.
Right.
There's different ways to do it, but there's 2 kind of main strategies that I talk about with clients. And so strategy A would be, and let me back up just a touch. So the reason and rationale for this every other day is that when you have a partner potentially with lower sperm parameters, the thought behind it is if you wait a day in between, that then he gets to build up his sperm a little bit so that you have more at each go. So that's so first and foremost, that's the reason that people, suggest it. But I would say that there's more than one way to do this. So option A could be to, as you start to understand your cycle a little bit, and again, we're not predicting, we're still checking every day, but if you have a pattern where you have your period and you have a couple of dry days and then you start to see mucus and then you go into ovulation, and in your cycle, ovulation does seem to be happening a little bit sooner in the cycle. So with that in mind, then one strategy could be to hold off on ejaculation for a couple of days. So 3 to 4, 5 is kind of like, you don't need to hold off on ejaculation for a month. Mm-hmm. So there's like a limit to how useful it is. So like 4 to 5 days, maybe kind of at the most. So then when you start to see mucus at the beginning of your cycle, then that's when you kind of break the seal. And if you're only seeing, like, let's say 2, 3, 4 days of mucus, you could just have sex once, you could have sex every day. Like, you don't have to feel this pressure to do it every other day.
Okay.
And recently I was doing some research on this very topic because I was curious to see if there's research on it. And it turns out there is. So there's studies there was this one study I found where they had the man ejaculate, I think 3 or 4 times in the same day. And they measured his sperm count to see how different it was. There was other studies where they had the man ejaculate once a day and then to see, like, if he ejaculates every single day, if there's like a drop off or whatever. So it was very interesting. So in the study where he ejaculated like 4 times a day, so there was a huge decrease in like the amount, like from ejaculation to ejaculation, because it's the same day. But the studies that we're looking at over the period of like 10 days or whatever it was interesting. So initially there was a drop off. I think it may be 20, 30% or something in terms of the count, but it hit a set point. So it dropped, but it didn't drop below a certain point, meaning men do have sperm every day. So it's not like he's going to have nothing. He might have a slightly less concentration, but it was very interesting because they had it plotted on a graph, and it was like, there was this initial drop in the first, 1 to 2 days. And then after that, it was consistent with whatever he was making.
That is super interesting.
Yeah. This is why it's helpful to look at the research because we can all have our opinions, but it's interesting to see. And it's also, I just find it fascinating. Someone did this study. Just like, this is cool. But yeah, so that kind of helps to, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the every other day. Sometimes I'll say, okay, so for my clients who might have 5 or 6 days of mucus, so, hold off maybe a couple days until you start to see mucus and then have sex like the one day and then skip a day, but then at some point just have sex. I mean, if there's only 6 days, you can't, like, this every other day strategy has limitations. But with that said, there's also a value of hitting at least one day. So you and your partner have to decide overall the strategy you're going to pursue. Mm-hmm. My hope is that I can reduce some of the stress around it. So you have succeeded if you hit one day in the window. Okay. Any other days are bonus, and take the pressure off of exactly how to do it. You can do it 3 days in a row. You can skip a day. I wouldn't say to stick too closely with the every other day. Yeah, again, when we're literally looking at like a 6-day window.
Okay. So like, for example, then in this cycle, since I did hit that peak day on day 10,
yeah,
but then my cervix didn't shift until day 11.
But it's a fertile day. So the sperm can survive up to 5 days.
Right.
So as long as you hit it in the day, it does mean that it's a try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this is also part of where my perspective shifts and where you can kind of hear, me always focus on the sperm quality and the egg quality, because from my seat, when I'm seeing clients, a lot of my conception clients are timing it correctly. Mm-hmm. And so then that's when we have to look at other things, because timing is obviously important. If we don't time it right, there's no right. pregnancy. But at the same time, timing is not the only factor. So it is important to get the timing right, but we don't need to stress about it. At least if you're having sex at least one time, then that's a try. And then we don't have enough time in one session to talk about all the things, but right. I'll make a couple notes. And so we're going to get into, like I said, the conception strategies, sperm and egg quality. We're going to talk about some of the other things that you can do alongside of this to give yourself the best chance.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is helpful. And I'm hopeful that cutting out the caffeine, and because like I said, I do feel like I've made so many different health changes over the last, really 4 years, but more specifically like 2, I guess, for me, and done a lot of different dietary changes and, just trying to figure this out and get back to optimal, I guess. And that's been the challenge. Because I remember when we were trying to conceive my then son, I would have major egg whites, I guess. I remember writing that on my chart, and I just don't see those anymore. So it was almost easier then, because you'd see that and it was like so blatantly smack you in your face obvious.
Yes.
Right. And now it's like, I get these my cervical mucus is very thin. It's not like this huge quantity. So hopefully making some of those changes. And I don't know if there's anything else I could do. I know we already talked about the cervical healing protocol and some of that, which I'm going to do, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the strategies that we talk about, are aimed to support the estrogen, progesterone production, follicular development. And these are things that we will be able to review your charts and see what we're actually seeing: improvements in the luteal phase, improvements in the mucus. And so that's kind of our way to gauge how successful those things are. So as we bring our conversation to close, I feel like we went in a lot of places and talked about a lot of valuable information. I think, especially for the listeners who are trying to conceive, this is going to be very valuable. For someone who's thinking about using fertility awareness or jumping into the fertility awareness mastery program for conception or for even birth control, what, if anything, would you want them to know?
Oh, just do it. Jump in, because you really have nothing to lose, I guess. It's a good value. You get a lot of good information. And even for someone who's been charting like I was, I've still learned a lot. So I wasn't a total newbie, but I've gained so much more valuable information about my overall health and really feel more confident about what I'm doing. And if I need to use this down in the future for birth control, I have that in my back pocket as well. So, and like I said, if you have kids, or more specifically have daughters, you want them to learn this, it's a great tool for you to have, I think. So help our next generation live healthier.
Yes, definitely.
Your hormonal lives.
Yes. Hopefully the next generation will know more than we did. Well, Callie, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience. Like I said, I love doing these episodes, and I'm excited to share it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/414. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Callie. It was such a treat to have her on the show. And I feel that we delved into a lot of really important topics in the Fertility Awareness Mastery Group Coaching Program. Each participant has a number of in-class hot seat sessions And we really get to delve into a lot of topics. So really what you hear when we do an on-air session is one of our sessions. And so, for example, with Callie in our follow-up calls, we're talking about a lot of other specific topics, from conception to sperm quality to egg quality, nutrition for conception and preconception. So there's a lot of different topics that we cover throughout the course, as well as having our individual sessions together. And if you're thinking of joining us in Fertility Awareness Mastery Live, we are starting in a couple of weeks. And so if you're listening in real time, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM, that's FAM, for details. If there are still spots available, then when you head over to that page, you'll see the opportunity to register. And if we're all full, you'll see the opportunity to join the waiting list for next time. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.